when we think about Lent, one of the things I want to say right off the bat too is that to me, it's a good practice for the church and a reminder of, like when you talk about emptying ourselves. I've said to my folks many a time, there's no retirement age for faith. We should be looking for, how does God want to grow us? And Lent is a time to think on that. Is there something within me that needs to get emptied and make some space? And so we should be willing to stretch ourselves spiritually. I have a high level of trust that for some of my church, some of Buena Vista Baptist, and I'm going to bet for Colonial Avenue, they're going to try this, and by the third or fourth day, they're going to read something and go, I don't really like that. I don't know what to do with that. I'm a little uncomfortable with that. And I would say to that, good. That's part of what we need. We need to be, we've had enough of our life disrupted by the pandemic, but sometimes we need our faith disrupted a little bit to make us think about how do we need to be growing in these things. And a large part of this comes down to motivations. It's in the introduction, the booklets that you're going to receive, but Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 18 is a big part of the footprint of these practices and things like that. And I'm actually going to start by reading then the first few verses. Jesus says this, so we should probably listen. Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. So the first one I want to think about is this idea of giving or almsgiving. And notice, he talks about hypocrites. End of the day, hypocrites are, in this instance, are people who give for or do good for insincere reasons. They do the right thing, but their heart isn't it's not the right motivating factor. They're just doing it for some other reason, most likely for their own gratification, their own satisfaction. And I love this quote that I found. In these acts, they should not be self-centered, but God-centered, done not to make us look good, but to make God look good. I'll say that again. They should not be self-centered, but God-centered, not to make us look good, but to make God look good. This is all about our motivation and wanting to do this in relationship to God, in response to God, and to think about why we do it. What's the motivation? Why, when we come to the different days that ask us to give something, more often than not, there's no reward. It's just to give. And that's huge. That's a big deal. I think about this a lot. How many fundraisers or activities or things are we willing to get involved in because it benefits somebody that we know? And how often do we get involved in something that we get nothing? We have no connection at all to that cause. And so we really have to check ourselves and think about this. And that's what this is designed to do, is to get us thinking about giving. And there's going to be some examples that involve financial giving, but there's going to be others that involve time, involve giving a gift to somebody. And so in doing so, it's not going to be doing that so that we get something back. It's not even doing it that we get a reward from God either. I was thinking about the prosperity gospel is huge in our world today. And this idea that if you want to receive, you got to give. You got to sow your seed, that God is going to bless you. And I don't think Melissa preaches that on Sundays. If she does, let me know. We'll correct that. But, this is not what we find in Scripture. Is not about giving in order to receive from God. It is not transactional. We live in a world that is very transactional. Think about what we see within our political parties. There's always, I'll give something, but you're going to have to give me back. There's always I'm never going to give just to be kind. But in so many other instances in our world, it's transactional. There's always the expectation that if I'm giving, It's because there's going to be a return on my investment. But when we think about giving during Lent, there is no return on your investment in terms of receiving something back. And so we have to remind ourselves that this is about stretching ourselves to look beyond what we want to receive in return and instead give because of a heart that is responding to how God has loved us and blessed us. Another person put it this way. They talked about how um, Jews could be really good to give, but they had the wrong idea. The Pharisees, they said this: they were not giving, but buying. They wanted the praise of men, and they paid for it. So again, we need to think about that. So when I look around this room that we're in right now, I'm willing to bet that everybody in this room is a faithful giver. Stewardship, financially, time, committees, teams, whatever. I'll bet you everybody in this room is a faithful giver. And the Jews, many of them were faithful givers as well, but Jesus invites us to consider why we give, not just systematically, but from the heart. Not just, hey, it's the first of the month and I give on the first of the month, or this is the cycle of when I do things. This is a time to reconsider, why am I giving? Not just because I've always done that, but why? What's my motivation? And how do you respond to requests to give? And so I'll finish with just a couple of other thoughts that I wrote down, and maybe to speak to this, how I interpret it. This is not about giving more. The goal for Lent is not about giving more, but giving better. It's not about giving more, but giving better. Checking our motivations. To give for the joy and the discipline of giving. And so that's part of my invitation, I think, as Jesus here talks about this, not trumpeting things, not making a big show. For instance, one of the Lenten Micropractices one day is about cooking a meal to take to somebody. That's a great idea, and maybe you'll choose to do that. But maybe somebody else can't cook worth a lick, but they'll call and have pizza delivered to their house, and just surprise them with that. We have a neighbor who 2 days ago showed up with food, just said, we can't eat all this, take it. My only complaint is that it was a fair amount of sugar, but my point being that it was given in love. And so as we think about these micro practices, and you see about giving, don't get bogged down in the details. Make sure you focus on the heart of it. And you may not be able to do it exactly the way that it's written on the paper, but I assure you, and in fact, I will be bold enough to speak for Melissa here as well, for everybody. However you choose to do it, if your motivation is good, you're doing it right. Go with that. So don't get bogged down in that. So that's my word on giving.